In the long, violent history of the NFL, there are players who hit hard, and then there are players who changed the meaning of fear itself. In the 1990s, a decade defined by toughness, grit, and raw violence, one man walked onto the field with an intensity the league wasn't prepared for. A man who didn't need spotlight, hype, or attention because his presence alone said everything. His name was Greg Lloyd. He wasn't supposed to become a star. He wasn't drafted as a future legend. He wasn't praised by scouts or treated like a franchise savior. But behind the quiet exterior was a fire forged through pain, discipline, and years of being underestimated. A fire that would turn him into one of the most feared linebackers in modern NFL history. Opponents felt it. Teammates respected it. Pittsburgh embraced it. Because Greg Lloyd didn't just play football. He attacked it. And behind the aggression, behind the violence, behind the legendary stare, was a story almost no one truly knew. A story of struggle. A story of discipline. A story of survival and transformation. Welcome to Black and Gold Legacy, where the untold stories of Steelers history finally come to life. If you believe these legends should never be forgotten, like, share, and subscribe. Today, we uncover the truth behind Greg Lloyd, the most feared linebacker of the 1990s. Early life, where the fire was born. Greg Lloyd's story doesn't begin on an NFL field. It begins in the quiet, rural heat of Fort Valley, Georgia, a place far from fame, the spotlight, and far from anything that resembled an easy life. He wasn't born into privilege. He wasn't raised in a football powerhouse town. And nothing about his childhood suggested he would one day become the heartbeat of the Pittsburgh Steelers defense. Life in Fort Valley was simple, but it wasn't gentle. From an early age, Lloyd learned two things: discipline and survival. He wasn't the biggest kid. He wasn't the loudest. He wasn't even the most confident. But what he did have was a quiet rage, a fire that began long before he ever picked up a football. And that fire found its first home not on the field, but in martial arts. As a teenager, Greg fell in love with the discipline of fighting, the structure, the focus, the demand for perfection. Where other kids played casually, Lloyd trained with the seriousness of a soldier. Punches, kicks, footwork, breathing. He studied every detail. It became his foundation. It became his identity. It became the steel inside him. High school coaches noticed something different. Not flash, not talent, but intensity, a raw, unfiltered drive that couldn't be taught. He wasn't the star of the town. He wasn't showered with praise. But every practice, every drill, every rep, he showed up with the same unshakable mindset. Work harder. Train harder. Never be satisfied. No one knew it then. Not his teammates. Not his coaches. Not even Greg himself. But this quiet kid from Georgia, disciplined by martial arts and shaped by struggle, was slowly becoming the man the NFL would one day fear. High school, the first signs of the fire. By the time Greg Lloyd reached high school, his reputation wasn't built on talent. It was built on attitude. Not the loud kind, not the arrogant kind, but the kind of attitude that made coaches look twice, and teammates step back when he lined up across from them. Greg wasn't the fastest player on the field. He wasn't the strongest. He didn't come in with the natural gifts that turned teenagers into hometown legends. But what he did have was a presence. Quiet, focused, unmoving. He practiced with the intensity of a man twice his age. He drilled every movement with the precision he learned from martial arts. Where other players chased highlights, he chased discipline. Coaches started to notice something rare. Greg never took a play off. He didn't complain. He didn't get rattled. He didn't show fear. He hit with perfect form. He studied his assignments. He played through pain like it didn't exist. Teammates began to realize this wasn't just another high school athlete. This was someone who approached football like a mission. Yet even with all of this, Greg still wasn't the star. He didn't get the attention other players did. He didn't receive letters from big colleges. He didn't have recruiters watching from the stands. And maybe that should have broken him. Maybe that should have made him quit. But for Greg Lloyd, being overlooked wasn't a setback. It was fuel. Every doubt, every dismissal, every time someone said he wasn't good enough, it added another layer to the fire already burning inside him. The truth is, the NFL didn't create Greg Lloyd. The Pittsburgh Steelers, didn't create Greg Lloyd. High school, the discipline, the anger, the silence, the work. That's where the foundation was built. And that foundation would soon carry him to a place nobody expected. A small college that would shape the next chapter of the man Pittsburgh would come to fear. College career, Ford Valley State, and the making of a warrior. When high school ended, the football world didn't open its doors for Greg Lloyd. There were no major college offers, no national scouts, no interviews or expectations, just silence. But sometimes, greatness doesn't begin with applause. It begins with being ignored. Ford Valley State University, a small historically black college in Georgia, became the only school willing to take a chance. A place without bright lights, national rankings, or ESPN cameras. A place where players weren't handed opportunities. They earned them, day by day, rep by rep. And for Greg Lloyd, it was the perfect place. At Ford Valley, the game slowed down. Not because it was easier, but because he finally had the space to transform himself. Not into a star, but into a machine. While other players enjoyed the freedom of college life, Greg approached every day with the cold discipline of a fighter. Early mornings, late nights, weights, footwork, film, repeating drills until his body shook. He didn't speak much. He didn't celebrate. He didn't ask for praise. He simply worked. Coaches quickly saw what high school coaches had seen before. Not flash, not hype, but focus. A rare, unnerving kind of focus. He studied offenses like a chess player breaking down the board. He memorized formations, counted tendencies, and learned to read a quarterback's eyes like a book. And every year, he grew stronger, faster, smarter, more violent, more controlled. Ford Valley State wasn't just a stepping stone. It was a laboratory where Greg Lloyd was building the identity that would one day terrify the NFL. But even after years of dominance, leadership, and relentless effort, the national spotlight still never came. No big awards, no hype, no invitations to major showcases. And when the NFL draft approached, the analysts barely mentioned his name. But to Greg Lloyd, being doubted was nothing new. He'd been doubted his whole life. And what the NFL didn't know, what the world didn't know, was that the fire inside him was now hotter than ever. A fire that was about to explode onto the biggest stage in football. NFL draft story. Overlooked, underestimated, unbreakable. By the time Greg Lloyd finished his career at Fort Valley State, he had become one of the most disciplined, explosive, and intimidating defenders in small college football. He had the film. He had the numbers. He had the work ethic. He had the mindset. But he didn't have something the NFL cared about. Hype. The scouts weren't coming. The reporters weren't writing. The analysts weren't paying attention. To them, Fort Valley State wasn't a factory of NFL greatness. It was an afterthought. And because of that, Greg Lloyd was, too. When the 1987 NFL draft approached, Greg didn't waste time dreaming. He didn't wait for a phone call that might not come. He didn't imagine walking across a stage. He just trained. Quietly. Relentlessly. As if he already knew the league was going to judge him before they ever saw him. Draft day arrived, and his name was never mentioned. Not in early rounds. Not in late rounds. Not once. But Greg Lloyd wasn't surprised. He'd been doubted for so long that rejection felt familiar. Predictable. Yet life has a strange way of giving the right player to the right city. And in Pittsburgh, a franchise built on violence, toughness, and blue-collar identity, someone saw something the rest of the league ignored. The Steelers didn't need a flashy linebacker. They didn't need a talker. They didn't need a headline. They needed a worker, a fighter, someone who played the game the way Jack Lambert once did, with a burning intensity that couldn't be measured by scouting reports. And that's when Greg Lloyd got the call. Pittsburgh was giving him a chance. Not a promise. Not a guaranteed roster spot. Just a chance. The only thing he ever needed. He walked into Steelers camp not as a star, not as a savior, not as a future legend, but as an overlooked, undersized, underappreciated kid from Fort Valley State. And what nobody knew, not the scouts, not the analysts, not even the coaches, was that this quiet, hard-faced linebacker was about to become the emotional heartbeat of the Pittsburgh Steelers. A new era was beginning. And Greg Lloyd was ready to introduce himself, not with words, but with violence. Rise to fame, becoming Pittsburgh's enforcer. When Greg Lloyd first walked into the Pittsburgh Steelers facility, he didn't look like the next face of the franchise. He wasn't a first-round pick. He wasn't a national headline. He wasn't even expected to make the final roster. But there was something about him, something coaches couldn't measure and teammates couldn't ignore. He trained like every day was a fight for survival. He hit like he was punishing the world for doubting him. And he moved with a precision that came straight from years of martial arts discipline. He wasn't loud. He didn't brag. He didn't beg for attention. He just worked. But the rise wasn't smooth. Injuries hit early in his career, painful, frustrating injuries that would have broken most young players fighting for a roster spot. Some coaches wondered if he would ever play long enough to show his true talent. But Greg Lloyd didn't quit. He rehabbed with the same fury he played with. He fought for every inch. And when he returned, he wasn't just ready. He was angry. By the early 1990s, that anger became his identity. This wasn't just a linebacker trying to earn snaps. This was a man who played the game like it had personally wronged him. When Lloyd stepped onto the field, the Steelers' defense changed. The energy changed. The stadium changed. He became the spark, the heartbeat, the tone setter. Teammates followed his intensity. Opponents braced for impact. Coaches trusted him with the emotional core of the defense. And Pittsburgh, a city built on steel, workers, toughness, and pride, saw him as one of their own. He didn't smile much. He didn't seek camera time. He didn't play for applause. He played for dominance. He played for respect. He played because football gave him a place to unleash everything he carried inside. Greg Lloyd didn't just rise to fame. He forced the NFL to recognize him. One hit at a time. One tackle at a time. One explosive, violent, unforgettable moment at a time. He wasn't just a linebacker anymore. He was the enforcer of Pittsburgh. And the league was starting to feel it. Strengths, playing style, and the traits that made him feared. To understand why Greg Lloyd became the most feared linebacker of the 1990s, you have to understand how he played the game, and why his style was unlike anyone else in the NFL. Greg Lloyd didn't just tackle players. He struck them. Every hit had intention. Every movement had meaning. Every snap carried the weight of someone who had spent his entire life fighting to be heard. His style wasn't built on size or raw speed. It was built on something far more dangerous: discipline, anger, precision, control. And together, they formed one of the most devastating combinations the league had ever seen. A martial artist in a linebacker's body. Most linebackers learned football through football. Greg Lloyd learned it through martial arts. His footwork was sharp. His balance was perfect. His body control was unmatched. He could explode sideways, forward, or backward with the smoothness of a fighter who trained every day to survive. Where other linebackers reacted, Lloyd anticipated. Where others hesitated, Lloyd attacked. Violent hands, explosive power. Coaches said his hands were like steel. He shed blocks with the force of a man throwing off chains. Offensive linemen hated engaging him, not because he was the biggest, but because he struck first and struck harder. He played low. He played angry. He played with a violence that was always legal, but rarely forgotten. The mental edge. Behind the fury was a mind built for the game. He read plays before they happened. He diagnosed formations within seconds. He knew exactly where a running back wanted to go, and he got there first. His preparation was elite. His instincts were surgical. His discipline was frightening. The stare, a weapon of its own. And then there was the stare. The cold, emotionless glare that told an entire stadium, "I'm not here to entertain you. I'm here to dominate you." That stare became iconic. A symbol of Pittsburgh toughness. A leader made of fire. Greg wasn't the kind of leader who gave emotional speeches. He didn't have to. His presence was the message. He pushed teammates by example. He held everyone accountable. He demanded the same intensity from others that he demanded from himself. He was the emotional engine of the defense, the heartbeat of the team, the one player opponents circled on film and still couldn't avoid. Greg Lloyd didn't just have strengths. He had weapons. And those weapons, discipline, violence, intelligence, and presence turned him into a linebacker the NFL feared more than almost any other player of his time. Signature moments, legendary hits, and the plays that built his myth. By the early 1990s, Greg Lloyd wasn't just a linebacker. He was a warning. Every offense that faced Pittsburgh began their week with the same question: how do we survive Greg Lloyd? Because his legacy wasn't built on interviews, awards, or headlines. It was built on moments, violent, unforgettable moments, where he changed games with a single play. The hit that announced his arrival. Every great defender has one moment that tells the league, "I'm here now." For Greg Lloyd, it came early in his rise, a clean, explosive, perfectly timed shot on a running back who never even saw him coming. That hit didn't just stop the play. It stopped the stadium. Coaches replayed it. Commentators studied it. Opponents feared it. It was the first sign that Greg Lloyd wasn't just another linebacker. He was something else. The strip sack that turned a season around. In a critical midseason game, Lloyd exploded off the edge with fighter-like footwork, beating the tackle clean and launching himself at the quarterback. Not just for a sack, but for the ball. He punched it out mid-hit, scooped it with impossible balance, and sprinted toward the end zone as the entire defense roared behind him. Pittsburgh didn't just win that game. They shifted momentum for the season. That moment became a symbol of who Lloyd was. Violent, timely, explosive, and unstoppable. The goal line stand that became legendary. In another defining moment, Pittsburgh needed 1 yard to save the game, and the offense on the other side needed the same yard to win it. On the snap, Lloyd shot through the gap with perfect timing, met the running back chest to chest, and drove him backward like he'd hit a wall of steel. The stadium erupted. The team lifted him, and the legend of Greg Lloyd grew even louder. The stare down that lives in Steelers lore. But some moments didn't require a hit at all. In one iconic showdown, Lloyd stood across from a star running back and locked eyes with him. No words, no trash talk, just that cold, unblinking stare that players across the league recognized instantly. "You're in my world now." That moment, replayed for decades by Steelers fans, said more than any stat line ever could. Play after play, game after game. Interceptions where he read the quarterback like a book. Tackles where he folded ball carriers into the turf. Forced fumbles that turned losses into victories. Plays where the defense fed off his energy like electricity. Every signature moment added to the myth. Greg Lloyd wasn't feared because he talked. He wasn't feared because he was flashy. He wasn't feared because of reputation alone. He was feared because every snap had the potential to become a moment you'd never forget. A moment you'd feel in your bones long after the game ended. Greg Lloyd created highlights that hurt, moments that lasted, plays that defined an entire era of Steelers football. And soon, the world would learn that these unforgettable moments came with a cost paid with pain, injuries, and battles that nearly broke him. Pain, setbacks, injuries, and the battles that nearly broke him. For all the violence Greg Lloyd delivered on the field, there was a different kind of violence being delivered to him. Quietly, constantly, and brutally. Because players like Greg don't rise without paying a price. And his price was steep. The first major injury, a warning of what was coming. Early in his career, long before he became a household name, Greg suffered a devastating knee injury. For most young players, it would have meant the end. For Greg, it became another challenge to fight through. He attacked rehab the same way he attacked ball carriers, with intensity, anger, and an unshakable refusal to quit. Doctors expected him to recover slowly. He returned faster than anyone believed possible. But the injury left a mark, a reminder that his body, no matter how strong, was still human. The pain that never left. What the public didn't see, what the commentators never talked about, was the constant pain Greg played through. Shoulder injuries, knee damage, ligament problems, bruises that never healed, hits that rattled the bones long after the stadium lights went dark. He woke up sore, stiff, bruised. But he played anyway, because to Greg Lloyd, pain wasn't a warning. Pain was fuel. The 1996 nightmare, the injury that changed everything. In 1996, the nightmare came. A catastrophic knee and ankle injury, one that doctors told him could end his career. Some even wondered if he would walk normally again, let alone play football at the highest level. For a man who built his identity on discipline, violence, and dominance, being forced to the sideline was torture. He fought to come back. He pushed his body past limits most athletes never reach. And he did return, but he was never the same. The speed that once terrified offenses wasn't the same. The explosion that shocked running backs didn't come as easily. The pain never left. The mental toll, the weight no one talks about. Fans saw the hits. Opponents felt the fear. Teammates felt the leadership. But nobody saw the emotional cost. Nobody saw the frustration of watching the team from the sideline. Nobody saw the doubt creeping in. Nobody saw the man behind the mask, the warrior struggling against his own body. Greg Lloyd never complained publicly. He never asked for sympathy. He never begged for forgiveness. He simply kept going, even when his body was telling him to stop. The controversies, the misunderstood warrior. With a player as intense as Greg, misunderstandings were inevitable. His stare, his attitude, his fire, his refusal to smile, his quiet, intimidating presence. Some mistook it for anger without purpose. Some thought he was too harsh, too aggressive, too extreme. But those who knew him, those inside the Steelers' locker room, understood the truth. He wasn't angry at opponents. He wasn't angry at teammates. He was angry at limitations, any limitation. He believed in discipline, in accountability, in doing your job or getting out of the way. And sometimes, that intensity was misunderstood. The fall no one wanted, but everyone knew was coming. By the late 1990s, the injuries had taken too much. The body that had once played like a weapon was breaking down. The warrior who once terrified the league was now fighting himself more than the opponents in front of him. Greg Lloyd's decline wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It wasn't filled with headlines. It was quiet, painful, and heartbreaking for anyone who understood what he had given to the game. But even in decline, even in pain, the respect never faded. Because legends aren't defined by how they fall. They're defined by what they survived. And Greg Lloyd survived more than the world will ever know. Legacy. The warrior who defined Steelers' toughness. When Greg Lloyd's body could no longer carry the violence he demanded of it, his time on the field eventually faded. But his impact never did. Because Greg Lloyd didn't just play linebacker for the Pittsburgh Steelers. He redefined what it meant to wear black and gold. The standard he set. Before Troy Polamalu became a symbol of controlled chaos. Before James Harrison became a nightmare for quarterbacks. Before Joey Porter became the emotional spark of the defense. Greg Lloyd set the blueprint. He brought a level of intensity Pittsburgh hadn't seen since Lambert. A level of discipline not witnessed since Jack Ham. A level of fear opponents whispered about long after the game ended. Players didn't just respect him. They studied him. Coaches didn't just trust him. They built defenses around him. He became the emotional core of the Steelers during a transition era. A bridge between the glory of the 1970s and the resurgence of the 2000s. The leader future legends learned from. Young defenders who entered the Steelers' locker room in the 90s tell the same story. If you wanted to know how to be a professional, you watched Greg. He didn't give motivational speeches. He didn't try to be a mentor. He didn't pretend to be a hero. But his work, his discipline, his attitude became the silent classroom every young Steeler learned in. A legacy of fear, but also respect. Opponents feared him because of the violence. Teammates respected him because of the sacrifice. Fans loved him because he represented everything Pittsburgh stands for. Hard work, pride, intensity. No excuses, no shortcuts, no soft edges. He didn't crave fame. He didn't chase numbers. He didn't care about the spotlight. He cared about playing the game the right way, with passion, with fire, and with everything he had. Is he a Hall of Fame player? The debate continues. Some say his peak was too short. Some say his numbers aren't enough. But Steelers fans, Steelers players, Steelers coaches, they know the truth. Greg Lloyd's impact cannot be measured by statistics. It lives in memories, in highlight reels, in bruises, in the fear he put into offenses, in the players who came after him, in the culture he helped build. the legacy that lives forever. Greg Lloyd was a warrior, a teacher, a tone setter, a standard bearer. To Pittsburgh, he will always be remembered as a linebacker who played with a fighter's heart and a Steel City soul. His legend isn't written in awards. It's written in the way he made people feel. And for that reason, long after the helmets are hung and the cheers fade, one truth remains. Pittsburgh never forgets its warriors, and Greg Lloyd was one of the fiercest to ever wear the black and gold. Greg Lloyd's story isn't just about football. It isn't just about tackles, highlights, or Pro Bowls. It's about a man who refused to be defined by where he came from, refused to be broken by pain, and refused to let the world tell him who he could or couldn't be. From the quiet fields of Fort Valley, to the brutality of Steelers training camp, to the roaring stadiums of the NFL, Greg Lloyd carried something inside him that no scout could measure, no coach could manufacture, and no opponent could ignore. A fire, a discipline, a relentless will to attack every moment as if it were the last. He wasn't the chosen one. He wasn't drafted with fanfare. He didn't walk into Pittsburgh expected to be a legend, but somehow through grit, focus, and sheer force of will, he became the emotional heartbeat of an entire franchise. And long after the hits faded, long after the cheers stopped, long after the injuries healed, the legacy remained. Because in Pittsburgh, we don't measure legends by awards. We measure them by toughness, by sacrifice, by the impact they leave behind. And Greg Lloyd left behind something powerful, a blueprint for every defender who would come after him, to the fans who watched him, to the players who learned from him, to the city that embraced him. His story will always matter. This has been Black and Gold Legacy, where the forgotten stories live, where the truth is told, and where the warriors of yesterday are honored forever. If Greg Lloyd's journey inspired you, if you believe stories like his should never fade, like this video, share it with every Steelers fan, and subscribe to Black and Gold Legacy. Because some players become stars, but only a few become legends. And Greg Lloyd was one of the fiercest legends of them all.